Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all, Canada's most irreverent talk show, the Andrew Lawton Show on True North. Great to have you tuned into the program on this Tuesday, July 23rd. Hope you're having a great week so far. And the Olympics are coming up. Now, I will be perfectly candid. I do not care about the Olympics. From time to time, I watch the opening ceremonies. But I say from time to time. I'm now wondering if I did it like at all since 2012. Which I believe were the Olympics in London, and I think I only watched because the Spice Girls were performing. So take from that. That's the most embarrassing thing I've ever said on the show. But anyway, they did a bang-up performance. And the Olympics are coming up anyway on the 26th, so you're going to get that barrage of Canadiana from time to time. Now, this year, I did note that Hamas has said it's going to be attacking the Olympics. Now, I'm assuming this is just bluster, but I trust the security will be taken as seriously as it deserves. And I hope the security at the Olympics is taken more seriously than wardrobe is by the Canadian Olympic Committee. Now, I just want to give you some contrast here. No, Sean was worried because he just told me he thought Hamas was going to have an Olympic team. So it would be basically. I'm trying to think of a quick joke that's not horrendously offensive. I don't have one. So no, Sean. There's no Hamas Olympic team this year. But you know what? There is a team for the state of Israel, and good for them for rising up above what's happened to that country since October 7th. There was one year, I'm trying to remember when it was. I saw the clip because sometimes the sports stuff penetrates into my world. It was an Olympic wrestling match, and I want to say it was Israel versus Iran, and the Iranian wrestler wouldn't shake the Israeli wrestler's hand. And I imagine we're probably going to see more displays like that from several athletes that get just their asses handed to them by Israelis and don't want to be sportsmanlike about it. But anyway, what I was going to say is that I hope that more thought has been given to the security of the Olympics than the Canadian Olympic team wardrobe. Now, I want to just give you a sense of contrast here. This is Team USA. So this is what the American athletes are wearing. This is their official getup. I don't know if it's intentional, but looks very astronaut-like. It looks like they could be, leading some mission to the moon, some mission to outer space. Good on them. And then you look at the contrast. This is the Lululemon inspired Canadian Olympic outfits, which I'm confused. I mean, the dog looks all right because the dog just has the red handkerchief. Some of them look like blood splatters. Like I saw someone on social media say they reminded him of something you'd see on the show Dexter. Dexter was the blood spatter analyst at whatever it was, Miami Metro Homicide. But that I just couldn't help but see this familiar scene from cinema history. Yeah. That's Kerry, who's actually an Olympic pole vaulter in Paris 2024 for Team Canada. So good on you, Kerry. We look forward to seeing you take home the gold there. Anyway, all that notwithstanding, I mentioned yesterday Justin Trudeau was taking a beach holiday. He was off to his favorite spot, Tofino. Usually he goes there on the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. This time he got a bit of an early jump on it, having a little family vacay, which I do not begrudge him. I said yesterday, and I've said in the past, if he were to spend all his time on vacation, Canada would be in a better place. But he was not entirely away from the prying eyes of the media. Geyn Bexte, who is a fellow independent journalist in this country, Geyn Bexte, I don't know if he was just on vacation in Tofino or if he hopped on a plane and went there knowing Trudeau would be there. But Geyn Bexte tracked Justin Trudeau down on a beach in Tofino. Trudeau has had me arrested for the crime of attending a press conference. Geyn writes, his officers have pushed me into traffic and I've had to sue to gain access to election scrums. This time he couldn't get away. Well, I mean, he could have run fast, but maybe Geyn could run as fast. For 10 minutes, I grilled him on the beach. Publishing tomorrow. There's a beach barbecue for you. Grilling Justin Trudeau on the beach. So I haven't seen the interview yet. I don't know. I mean, it looks like he's actually responding. It looks like Trudeau is not just giving him the cold shoulder. That was taken yesterday. Now, all of the conspiracy theorists online, I find it hilarious because I've met Geyn on a number of occasions, and all the conspiracy theorists that think he's like some Trudeau plant, some controlled opposition. People saying that basically Trudeau and Geyn had arranged this so it looks like Trudeau is facing scrutiny. And I'm thinking, like, is this really where collaboration has gotten now? The Justin Trudeau and Geyn Bexty are secret BFFs partying it up on Tofino, saying, I know what we can do to make people think we've really pulled the wool under their eyes. But anyway, the thing that has come up here, which is interesting, is that all of the people online are like, how do you get close to him? You would be astonished at how lax security is in Canada. Now, I believe that is a feature and not a bug. I like that in Canada, political assassinations are not the norm, that assaulting politicians is not the norm. It's happened. Darcy McGee was assassinated, but we're going way, way back now, about 140 years, I think, for the assassination of Darcy McGee. And, Trudeau, despite the hatred and animosity directed towards him, the worst he's ever endured was having some gravel thrown at him. Now, there was, again, someone who tried to bring a truck and firearms to Rideau Cottage, but didn't get anywhere near him, thankfully. So in Canada, the fact that you can just walk up to your prime minister is a hallmark of a free and accountable country. And it says something that Justin Trudeau lets his guard down when he's on his beach vacations. What's interesting to me is that Trudeau will, as Geyn writes there, ban all journalists he doesn't like from covering him. He will have police remove journalists he doesn't like, but sometimes you can catch him off guard. So I look forward to seeing the interview. I will be watching it when it comes out tomorrow. I don't know if there are going to be any good answers in it or not, but good on Geyn for going there and doing that when no other journalists were. And, you could talk about the ethics of harassing someone on vacation, but I don't view it as that when it's a public figure walking out on a public beach. And I will also point out how amusing it is that if you were to tell me, don't give me any information. Oh, apparently they had a romantic moment on the beach, you're saying, Sean? There was this beautiful... Oh, that's beautiful. Look at that nice silhouette there in the shadows. I'm assuming that was at the beginning of the exchange, not the end, but you never know. Anyway, that's a nice little memento. Geyn should have that framed. His one and probably only interview with Justin Trudeau. But anyway, the thing I was going to say there before Sean told me we had that photo, well, I forgot where was I going with that? I had something else I was going to say. It would have been great. It would have been the best thing I ever said, and you'll never get to hear it now. Thanks, Sean. Hope you're happy about that. Oh, arrested. No, it wasn't about the arrest. Anyway, we'll move on. The one point I'll raise here is that Justin Trudeau is still in government. He is there probably until the next election. It seems like this momentum from his caucus that we had hoped would be there to have a leadership review to get rid of him hasn't been there at all. It was one MP and the rest were just former cabinet ministers and such. But the NDP remain the most underutilized political force right now. Jagmeet Singh, if he wanted, could be the most powerful man in Canadian politics. That would require having a bit of a spine. It would require having a bit of courage. These are not things he's been able to find. The story I've told, I don't like reusing jokes, but everyone laughs at it, so I should reuse it until people stop laughing. I saw Jagmeet Singh leaving Parliament Hill once riding his bike, and my first thought was, I didn't know you could do that without a spine, so I was impressed. I was impressed that he could do that he could stand upright and wasn't just flopping along as he was going down Wellington Street. But Jagmeet Singh had some very harsh words for Justin Trudeau's government at a press conference yesterday.
When it comes to housing, the North has always felt neglected, ignored, like it doesn't matter. And now we've got a housing crisis, all that negligence means people are really feeling that. You can't find a place that's affordable. If you've got a place you live in constant fear, if you lose it, you'll have nowhere to go. And we know that Justin Trudeau has been in power for 9 years, has ignored the North, hasn't solved these problems. And I want to be very clear. He has had the opportunity to take on corporate greed with corporate grocery stores, failed to do so. He had the opportunity to build homes that are affordable for people, failed to do so. He has failed.
Oh, he has failed. He's had the opportunity to build homes. He's failed. The opportunity to take on corporate greed. He's failed. He's failed. He's failed. He's failed. These aren't my words. This is Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the New Democratic Party of Canada, talking about Justin Trudeau's record as Prime Minister. Well, one of the journalists who was at this scrum asked what I would say is, no offense to the journalist, the obvious question in light of such a profound declaration of failure.
A lot of talk has been talked about your opposition, the governing party. Sounds like we are close to an election. So are you ready to, end your partnership with the Liberals and put the words to action at the polls?
Well, either way, we're ready. We're getting close to an election. Election is scheduled for the by law election date is going to be in 2025. So either way, we're close to an election. We want people to know the choice. That choice is really important. We'll be ready to find an election whenever that happens. And we want people to know what their choices are. You got a choice between an out-of-touch Liberal government that has let you down and Justin Trudeau, who has failed you on taking on corporate grocery prices, failed you on building homes that people can afford. He has failed.
He reiterates the failure message, but the question was, hey, will you pull your support from the Liberals? And Jagmeet Singh's like, well, what support? There's already an election coming up. What are you talking to me about it for? Yeah, we've got an election next year. Who cares? What's your rush? What's your hurry? So when Jagmeet Singh says this, what he's saying is that there isn't actually a choice, that the NDP and the Liberals are indistinguishable because his record is Justin Trudeau's record. Jagmeet Singh would love to tell you that he has a record that stands apart from the Prime Minister's, that his party has a record and a history and an identity that is separate from that of the Liberals and that of the Liberal government. It's just not true. Jagmeet Singh has not achieved anything. His greatest accomplishment could be pulling out his support and taking down the most unpopular government in my lifetime anyway, certainly the most unpopular government of the last 20 years. And he could do this very easily. One vote in the House of Commons and Canadians will effectively be going to the polls because Justin Trudeau would have stopped having the confidence to govern. So unless you imagine some scenario in which the Bloc Québécois flip or whatever it is, like that's not going to happen. So Jagmeet Singh could do it. He could do it and is choosing not to. He is choosing not to. And this is, to me, where we as Canadians have to put a lot more scrutiny and skepticism towards Singh. Now, look, Justin Trudeau is the guy who's in power right now. He's the guy that has to ultimately bear responsibility for what the government of Canada has done that has been so problematic and troubling. That being said, Jagmeet Singh cannot pretend that he is not a part of this. He cannot pretend that he is not a quintessential part of this government. And the fact that he didn't even get a cabinet post out of it is hilarious. Like, this is literally a coalition government by another name, the Supply and Confidence Agreement, which means that he is supporting the government and getting nothing for it. Oh, yes, but we got pharmacare. We got national pharmacare. No, you didn't. You got some diabetes drugs covered, and the Liberals were already promising those. But good for you, little buddy. Good for that. Good for you. You played hardball, and you got something they were offering anyway. Congratulations. My goodness. It's a wonder. Like, Jagmeet Singh should be the one on the beach in Tofino, going down and finding Trudeau and trying to take him to the carpet. But instead, he is basically just another limb to the Trudeau government right now, and not a particularly useful one. I want to shift from the political side of things to the judicial side, although increasingly there is a bit of a blurred line between these two bodies. There was a Supreme Court decision that came down on Friday, which is on the surface something that people might be supportive of. It's the Supreme Court saying the federal government does not have absolute immunity from liability when Parliament enacts laws that are later overturned as unconstitutional. If you are a legal scholar, which I don't pretend to be, you might find some issues in this. And if you look more closely at the implications of it, there are some big problems that come about from this. And I want to talk to our good friend Christine Van Geyn, who is the litigation director for the Canadian Constitution Foundation, knows the law far better than I, and I would say far better than most judges in Canada too. But that's another discussion. Christine, good to have you back. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me on, Andrew.
So, you could look at this and not be familiar with the context and say, oh, wow, yes, the court's saying that the government can be found liable if there are unconstitutional laws. That sounds great. We don't want the government to skirt from this. But there's a bigger problem in this. And I was hoping you could just explain what that is.
So I actually don't think that it's a problem. I think that it's a good thing.
You do? Okay, I'm interested in this because a lot of your colleagues are saying the opposite.
Not my colleagues, but there is a group who in Canada who wants sort of unfettered parliamentary power. And I think that Canada's history has shown that Parliament enacts laws that can be abusive, can be enacted in bad faith. And while I am generally a skeptic of judicial power, I'm also a skeptic of parliamentary power. And I think that the case power that we're discussing, RV power, gets that balance right. So for your listeners, for the context, the question in power involved a man who had been convicted of some indictable offenses. He had sought a pardon, but then there was a law that prevented him from getting this pardon. And the result was that he lost his job. And he wanted to sue the government because that law that prevented him from getting the pardon ended up being found to be unconstitutional. So he did suffer damages. He lost income. He lost his job. And he wants to sue the government for damages for this. Now, I don't think that this particular case is an especially compelling one, maybe. I don't know that I'm convinced that he is eligible for damages in his set of circumstances. But what the government had argued, the federal government had argued, was that they have absolute immunity for ever being sued for damages for an unconstitutional law. And the sort of dispute here is about the difference between Parliament passing an unconstitutional law, the act of passing the law, versus the executive action of perhaps enforcing the law or a government acting in a particular way. So I'll give you two examples to try to explain this. We all know that if you are subject to police brutality, if a cop beats you up for no reason at all, you're minding your own business, and suddenly a police officer assaults you, you can sue the state for damages. But what if instead of, and that's considered executive state authority, but what if instead of a police officer beating you up, Justin Trudeau, Parliament, passed a law that said Andrew Lawton is a terrible man. No one should ever give Andrew Lawton a job. Andrew Lawton's neighbors should stop speaking to him. In fact, maybe Andrew Lawton should be executed. Now, that is a law called a Bill of Attainder. And they used to pass these in England that led to, the execution of quite famous people in England. And the question is, even if, say, maybe you aren't executed, but you suffer all kinds of other damages because of this law, people stop speaking to you, you lose your job, you become a social pariah, all because of this bill that was passed, this legislation that was passed by Parliament. Should you be able to sue for that? That is what the power case was about. And we think that when there are laws that are enacted in bad faith, that are an abuse of power or are clearly unconstitutional, and that there are damages that flow from that, we think you should, in those very exceptional circumstances, be allowed to sue.
We tend to, in conversation, view the government in a more encompassing sense than it actually is. There is a difference between the government and Parliament, between the legislature and the executive. And one of the criticisms I've seen of this is that this effectively blurs those lines. That all of a sudden the executive, which is, again, despite how we tend to view it as Canadians, it is a different organ from the legislature, is now accountable for what Parliament is doing.
Yes. So the criticism of the case is that Parliament has absolute immunity, that parliamentary supremacy and sovereignty allows Parliament to enact bills, including bills that we know have caused great harm. And Canada's history tells us we have bills like this. We've seen the internment of Japanese Canadians, the forced sterilization of Indigenous women in Canada. We know that we have passed laws as a country that have hurt people. We think that there should be damages that can flow from that, even if it's different from an executive act, like, for example, a police officer assaulting a member of the public. We do think in those very, very high and very exceptional circumstances, by shielding the government of those most egregious things, it would actually subvert the values and principles of government accountability, and allowing people to sue for damages in those exceptional cases is a measure of accountability.
So let's talk about this dialogue, which I'm getting triggered even thinking about, having studied this in school, this dialogue between courts and the legislature. It was one of the theories advanced to kind of try to come up with an answer to this, which is supreme, truly, the court or the legislature. And it was not the most convincing argument, because at the end of the day, someone has to have the last word here. And we can look at the flaws of judges in the judiciary, and we can look at the flaws of politicians, but at least one is democratically accountable. So why should, if we're giving one the final say, should it not be Parliament?
Look, as I said, I'm also a skeptic of judicial power. I think judges get it wrong. Judges are cloistered. Judges often don't understand real individuals' lives experiences. But on the other hand, as I said, I'm also a skeptic of government power, whether that's legislative power or whether it's executive power. And as I said, we have a history of getting it wrong we have a history of Parliament getting it wrong. That Bill of Attainder example that I gave you, by the way,
there we go.
That, I said that these were things that happened back in England and in like the 1500s. I think 1542, there were a number of bills of attainder passed in England, but we have a history of them in Canada too. Twice Parliament has tried to pass bills of attainder against specific individuals. Now they were individuals that I think we would all condemn. They were people who, were notorious murderers. But still, we have seen a willingness of Parliament to go there. And I think that this is a limited check on the power of Parliament when they're doing something that's clearly wrong or abusive or in bad faith. This is an appropriate and very limited check on that power. Look, Andrew, I'm a skeptic of all power. I just do not want anyone telling me what to do, whether it's our legislature, whether it's the executive, or whether it's the judiciary, and especially if it's the Senate.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, I would be inclined to side with, if I have to pick judicial supremacy or legislative supremacy, I would be inclined to say judicial supremacy if courts were a lot more restrained in where they tend to go. And one of the challenges in Canada is that you have a court that has historically liked to manufacture rights that do not exist, and manufacture interpretations of the Constitution that there isn't really a basis for. And that's, I guess, my concern that I have on this is that it is really the court, it seems like, expanding its own view or expanding its own mandate in judicial review.
So actually, that's not what the criticism is here of the power case. I'm very familiar with
Kerry's son had made that point in the National Post, so I'm lifting his work in part.
I think that the main criticism is actually more of a floodgates criticism than a criticism about expanding rights violations. So typically, would have to.
Well, no, I was being in general about an issue I have with courts, but in this case, it's a valid point. Yeah.
Let me explain the criticism so I can address it. I think that the main criticism of this decision is that it will open the floodgates for litigants, class action lawyers, to start suing the government for laws that they pass that people don't like. And that is not what this case does. This case actually is an affirmation of a pre-existing case that has already been in force for I think about 20 years. It's a case called Mackin that set the threshold for when you can sue for an unconstitutional law passed by Parliament. And that case put that threshold high at clearly wrong, clearly unconstitutional, and abusive power or in bad faith. And I mean, we have seen that precedent in force for 20 years. The floodgates did not open then. They have not been opened. This is just an affirmation of the existing state of the law. The court talked about there is no need to revisit Mackin. The principles of negligence, for example, would not be enough for you to be able to sue for damages for an unconstitutional law. So I think there's two issues. The one that you pointed to, the judiciary taking an expansive view of rights violations. Look, I share the concerns with that problem, but it's a different issue from what power is really about. The issue in power was, I think your viewers might be more interested in the debate about whether that law that denied Power his pardon should have been found unconstitutional or not. This was a person who had been convicted of indictable offenses. Should he be eligible for a pardon? The issue of the expansive court interpretation was whether that law was unconstitutional, not necessarily the decision about whether or not he can sue for damages. I actually don't think under the threshold in either Mackin or this new case, Power, that threshold is actually met. I don't think he'll be successful in his claim for damages. It's just that now he can pursue it. It's affirmed that he can pursue it.
What do you make of how close this was? Now, not that closeness, necessarily means anything more than who's on the bench at a particular time. Like, I remember your right to tell an offensive joke in Quebec was also a 5-4 decision, but 5-4, were you surprised by that?
Based on watching the hearing, no. I think we saw where Justice Rowe was going. He was in the dissent in this case. I was not surprised that he was in the dissent. It looked like he was going to dissent. I was not surprised. We've seen the court split a number of times before. This was a split decision where there was a majority, then in part dissent, and then there was a full dissent. So I encourage your viewers to read the online article. The online publication, The Line, has run two competing op-eds, one by me and my colleague Josh DeHaas, and another by lawyer Asher Honickman, where we kind of debate in public these kind of issues that we're grappling with here today. But yeah, we intervened in this case and the court sided with our argument. So we're happy with that. I think that as a skeptic of state power, I come down on the side of limiting state power.
All right, Christine Van Geyn, do read those pieces in The Line as well. Read everything in The Line. They do some great stuff there.
Okay.
Christine from the Canadian Constitution Foundation. Always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, thank you. I wanted to turn from one issue to another that has become quite significant in Canada in the last little while, and that has been the immigration system in this country, which has been under strain. Now, I should just say, a couple of months back, maybe 6-8 weeks ago or so, Justin Trudeau himself acknowledged the immigration system has become more than the country can handle, the volume of people coming in. We've had Mark Miller, the immigration minister, talk about this in a very similar context with an influx in international students. And you have to look at Pierre Poilievre, for example, the Conservative leader, has said in response that he wants to really go back to basics here and have a number that is tied to workforce, the labor market, housing market, social services, so that the number of people that you admit into the country every year is in some way tied to that. I'd be remiss to not point out that there was a recent report showing that the unemployment rate for temporary residents in Canada hit 11% in June. Now, unemployment for temporary residents, this includes foreign workers, international students, asylum seekers, is double the national average. Now, some of these people are educated, qualified, skilled people that can't find work in this country. What do you do about that? I want to welcome to the program immigration lawyer. I should point out, not just an immigration lawyer, but also the chair of the Business Immigration Committee for the Canadian Immigration Lawyers Association, Siavash Shakarian. Siavash, thanks for coming on today. Good to speak to you.
Hi, Andrew. Glad to be here.
So let's just start with that gap there. Why is that unemployment rate so different for the national standard that we see and doubling that what we get for temporary residents, in your view?
Well, it can have many different reasons, but at the very least, it's an indication that we're doing immigration wrong. Like it's an indication that our immigration system in general, but in particular, our immigration selection policy is broken. And by broken, I mean it's not working the way we want it to work. And that discrepancy has a lot to say to that, right? If we really want to root cause this, we have to go in deeper and look at the unemployment rate among high-skilled job vacancies, low-skilled job vacancies. But for the time being, let's just stay general. That's an indication of a broken selection policy.
We do have a system. I mean, people often talk about the point system. We try to ensure that people who are coming to Canada have, a certain number of aptitudes and capabilities, education levels, skills. We fill job vacancies specifically, but you're saying that in and of itself is a flawed starting point on this, of trying to fill individual gaps in the labor market. Why?
Yeah, because, okay, so here's the thing. We have this point system, which we wanted it to bring in the sharpest and the brightest and the best matches for what we have on the ground and for our labor needs, right? I'm going to give you an example of how the system is flawed in design. So we say we give candidates a score based on human capital factors. Age is there, education is there, language proficiency is there. But let's take education, for example, right? So we give points for education, but the system doesn't distinguish between a top school like University of Waterloo, University of Toronto graduate and a paper mill college. That's a catastrophe because the employability of a top school graduate is radically different from the employability of a paper mill college. But nonetheless, they get the same points. Same thing happens with work experience. We reward work experience, but we don't distinguish where the work experience comes from, right? We don't even interview candidates anymore, right? It's just a system nobody sees. So we decide about the future of our country and the future of our new immigrants just based on papers.
Explain that. I wasn't aware of that. So work experience is not distinguished based on what you've done. Can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, work experience, we don't distinguish. So if you're coming, so if you worked on this highly sophisticated line in NASA or Google, you get the same amount of points that if you really worked, for your cousin's modest operation. So the system doesn't really distinguish. The same thing that is happening in education, right? As I gave you an example, regardless of where you're educated from, we just look at that degree. But there's a lot more to say behind the scenes that we don't look at. So that's why you see, other than this new report that says, okay, we're looking at unemployment rate, but a bigger catastrophe is the underutilization rate, right? So you come to this country, you say, oh, I'm a mechanical engineer, at least on paper, right? But I realize that the degree that I got is really not a good match for the sophisticated market that we have in Canada for high skilled work. Therefore, we see that the Statistics Canada says that our STEM education, that our STEM graduates are 50% underutilized. Or in the healthcare system too, right? 60% of them are underutilized. So 60% of the people who have health-related education are not working in that sector. So we're doing something wrong.
Yeah, and there are two issues. I mean, we've all seen the videos, especially from the GTA, where some grocery store will have a job fair and you've got, a lineup for blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks of people, a lot of them immigrants, new Canadians, temporary residents that are looking for, what's, to be frank, lower paid service industry work. But you're talking about another aspect here, which is people who are qualified, educated, people with engineering degrees still can't find work themselves. And that to me is the ultimate in setting those people up for failure. If we as a country are admitting the guy with an engineering degree or the woman with the medical degree or nursing degree and we can't find a job for them, then what's the point of it?
Exactly. There are two sides to this story, right? One side is you see queues for low-paid, low-skilled jobs. You see a gig economy that is just, booming. And on the other end of the spectrum, you see qualified on paper, underqualified in practice crisis, right? So I'm sad to say, but we seem to be doing everything wrong, right? Because if you look at the low-skilled one, there's a catastrophe there. Because if you look at the statistics, right, we say there's this topic. Okay, what are we going to do about the work that Canadians are not willing to do, right? That's a topic of interest when we get to these. We're saying, okay, so for those kind of work, we have to bring in people who are willing to do the work. But if you look at the statistics, we see that the temporary foreign worker program that we have, at least based on the most recent announcement that IRCC had on curtailing the temporary residents, we see that only 9% are coming from that program. 60% are international students, their spouses, and international students who are on PGWP. So here, in reality, is what we're doing. We're promising prospective international students, like, come to Canada, get top-of-the-line education, find the best work possible. They come here, we exhaust them of their resources, and I mean mental and financial, only for them to realize that the education that they got is not going to get them anywhere. So they have to go to the economy, to the gig economy, or do a low-skilled job. So they become depressed, angry, resentful, and we hear stories that, unfortunately, we're sending coffins back. So we broke your dream. We didn't give you what we promised you to do. And in the process, we are also breaking on our own system.
So the easy response to that, and I don't want to oversimplify it, is to look at it and say, okay, the number's too high, lower the number, problem solved. Is it that simple?
Of course not. Of course not. We've been doing this all wrong, I think, from day one, because we looked at it from a quantitative perspective. Quantity is easy to understand, right? If I'm minister, I can say, oh, number, the more the better. So the higher the number, I get to congratulate myself a lot, and it's easy to understand. But it's much, much more complicated than that. Immigration is not a numbers game. Right? It's a very, very complicated issue that quantity, I think, is the...
But how is it not in a way, though? Because a lot of the economic problems you're describing can be quantified. You have available housing, available jobs, number of immigrants. That is a new... I mean, they're humans, but it is a numerical issue there, is it not?
Sure, let's talk about it. So you're saying if we were to say, let's quantify immigration, where does that number come from? And let's agree that for Canada, immigration is not a privilege, right? It's not saying, oh, this is an add-on that we prefer to have. It's our lifeline, right? 98%, almost 100% of our population growth comes from immigration. So we have to do it. So that's there. And now that we have to do it, how many is good? Like, who came up with 1% of the population? Where did that number come from? Are we compensating for our birth deficit? Like, I don't know, we need to get 2.1 per mother. We're getting 1.3 or something like that. So there's a deficit there. We are seeing people retiring in droves, like 340, 350,000 a year. So do we need to replace that? So there's 350,000 there. And if you start thinking about it from a purely numerical way, you see that, oh, we need a lot more people that we are currently bringing in. But it's not a numbers game, because we are seeing the crisis right now. Can our healthcare system handle the number we're bringing? Does our housing can handle the number that we're bringing in? So the dilemma is, we need them, but do we want them? And by wanting them, I mean, because we want everybody to win. We don't want to bring in people here so they're sad, they can't find jobs, they can get good healthcare, they can find housing, right?
So well, there's also a paradox there, in that you have the government saying, well, we need immigrants to fill construction jobs to build the houses that we need to house the immigrants. And you're like, well, hang on. There's a circular logic you hear in that. And you're right. So that's fair. The numbers just don't add up if you look at it purely in that perspective.
No, they don't. And then that's why I'm saying that it's a much more complicated issue than just the numbers, right? I'm going to give you another example. Houses are not just built by workers, right? You need entrepreneurs, developers that can come here, and then, they bring their ingenuity and they bring in their innovation to kind of revolutionize our current status of the industry. But if you look at our selection system, we are almost completely ignoring entrepreneurs, right? We're focused on bringing in the workers, but why are we not focused on bringing in the job creators? That's like an issue that is so understated and nobody really talks about as often as we should. Because how many workers do you really want to bring to the economy that has an entrepreneurial crisis? And this is not me saying it. BDC report after report. First of all, they call us a nation of entrepreneurs. The bedrock of our economy is small and medium-sized businesses. So it's entrepreneurs. Right? And we see that their rate is on decline. They call it succession tsunami, right? Our baby boomers are retiring. They want to get rid of the businesses. They don't have buyers. Immigration can be an obvious solution, but we're not using it. So this is another misguided selection thing that we're doing. We're not doing our immigration policy based on the reality on the ground that we see.
I know that the U.S. has done this historically, as I understand it, quite well. There are problems with their approach. Canada does have entrepreneurial streams, though. They're just as you were saying that, I looked up and I see different provinces have their own guidelines where you can come to Canada and start a business and get a work permit. What's wrong with that, or what is inadequate about the status quo in your view?
Well, let's take Ontario for an example, right? Ontario had an entrepreneurial stream for business, for entrepreneurs. They closed it down December 2023 with no notice. The reason they said it was the unsuccessful appeal of the program. It was too complicated for no good reason. Why is that? Because the policymakers lock themselves behind closed doors, right? They don't look at the reality of the ground. They don't appreciate that being a Canadian-born entrepreneur in today's Canada is already a difficult task, let alone if you're coming from a different economy, and let's be honest, we're not the top destination for advanced economies, right? Let's not kid ourselves. We are the top destination usually for economies that are much worse off than we are. So that gap must be filled in an economy that is already hard for Canadian-borns to fill. And if we are sitting behind closed door and making policy that doesn't take into consideration all these real nuances, we end up with what we have right now. And I gave you Ontario as a good example because it's the most popular and the most populous province that we have in Canada. So by extension, you can think about, because all the other PMP entrepreneurial streams, those programs that are designed to target entrepreneurs, were kind of modeled after the Ontario program. It's too much of a burden over the shoulders of a poor immigrant that is coming here with all their hopes, their money, and their resources with too little security, right? It's the way we do immigration, at least on the entrepreneurial stream, on the provincial level, is extremely selfish without regard to the reality on the ground. Again, so it's not just the federal government's problem, it's a provincial government problem as well.
What a contrast. We bring in people through all of these streams that end up having trouble finding work, and then shut down the one that lets people come in and to create jobs. Great set of priorities from our government here. Well, it's great to talk to you. A lot to unpack here, and I'm sure we'll revisit this in the future. Siavash Shakarian, thank you so much for your time, sir.
My pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, thank you. That does it for us for today. We'll be back tomorrow with more of the Andrew Lawton Show here on True North. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to the Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.